Voy a dar una clase, una masterclass. La voy a hacer en inglés, así que voy a hablar en inglés desde ahora, pero si esto sale bien, pues haremos otra en español. Anyways, masterclass on the language. I'm gonna write that down here. Of movement. Welcome everybody. Bienvenidos. Hello, as you're checking in, my name is Paoli. You may know me from the CrossFit scene from back in the day, back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. If you searched anything gymnastics related, you probably found some of my work. And today I'm going to be giving a little talk about the language of movement. And as I see you joining, let me know where you're joining from. Hola Alberto. Oye loco. Didn't know you spoke Spanish. Sí, hablo español también, pero hoy vamos a dar la clase en inglés. New York City. Hello. Welcome everybody. Thank you for the hearts. I think it's Alberto giving me some hearts. Much love. Yeah, let me know where you're checking in from. We have Marta from Barcelona. Yeah, thank you for being here. We're going to give it a few minutes before we get started. And once we get started, I'm going to share with you what has become the foundation of the work that I do. And the work that I do is teaching people how to move better. And movement is not only physical, it's also mental and emotional. And thus, I'm going to show you a framework that I've used, and I've written a book about this called Freestyle. Specifically, the framework is called Freestyle Connection. And it has a couple of guidelines that can help all of us understand why we do what we do it for, what it is that we need, and how we can continue to progress. Saludos, Málaga. Hello. Alcover. Fantastic. Bienvenidos. Welcome, everybody. Bienvenidos a todos. Gracias por estar aquí. Hola. Perfecto. Okay. As I go on, you can ask me any questions here in the comments. And when I'm done with the lecture, I will come back and review some questions and see if I can answer those questions. In addition to that, if you don't feel comfortable writing a question in English, feel free to write it in Spanish. I can perfectly read that. So, para los que habláis español, si me estáis escuchando y queréis preguntarme algo, siempre me podéis preguntar en español, que no hay problema, y os contestaré en inglés, pero luego después del live ya lo podemos solucionar a través de directo, ¿ok? O DM. Direct message. Bueno, empezamos. Bienvenidos a todos. Gracias por estar aquí. Fites and Freakes me ha dado la oportunidad de poder compartir con vosotros hoy un par de palabras sobre la base del movimiento. Y voy a dar esta clase en inglés. So, we're jumping into it now, and it's going to be in English, as I said. And it's all about the foundation of movement. Now, every single one of you who is here, to some degree, you practice movement. You're either in CrossFit, you're in the fitness scene, you do some kind of functional fitness. And in your training and your pursuit, whether you're a coach or an athlete, you are probably aware of what you're doing to some degree, meaning you are paying attention, either because you're learning a new technique or you are practicing a technique that you later on want to apply to maybe competing or to getting fitter, which may be measured in lifting more weight, being more flexible, losing weight, being leaner, being a better parent, a better person, a better citizen. And it's really important in our exercise of awareness that we get to know the language that our body speaks. And the language that our body speaks is very simple to see if we can use a high-level framework that I call position, movement, purpose. Position, movement, purpose. Now, let's start with position. I want you to think about any movement that you do in life, any movement. And I want you to notice that there are 3 master positions that you go through. There's a start position, there's a transition position, there's a finish position. Think about a basic squat, una sentadilla, okay, a squat. Your standing position would be your start. Your squat position, when you're at the bottom of the squat, would be your transition. Your standing position, once you return back up, would be your finish position. I want you to notice that those 3 master positions, start, transition, finish, are the anchor that allows you to describe a movement. Now, if you think about just movement, not just from its function, but rather from the positions in space, it becomes really easy to start to define these movements. But it also becomes even more enticing than defining it to be able to progress it, to move it forward, to adapt it. And a lot of us think that we need to focus on all 3 positions to master a progression, but in reality, the most important position to focus on is the transition position. Now, let me give you an example of why this is. This is a typical message that I get all the time. Hey, Carl, I can do 100 pull-ups, 100 dips, but I just can't get the transition to do a muscle-up. If you can relate to that, just give me some hearts so I know that you're with me on this. If you can't relate to it, ask me a question and say, what the heck are you talking about? Okay, so 100 pull-ups, 100 dips, I just can't get the transition. There's something about the transition that I'm struggling with. It's in the transition position where we run into trouble, but it's also in the transition position where we can develop the greatest progressions, the most inclusive progressions. And something that I say all the time is that the best progression is the progression that allows us to ramp up the most novice and challenge the most advanced. Let me give you an example. When I was coaching Annie Thorisdottir back in 2011, 2012, during the CrossFit Games seasons, I would teach her and work with her on the same progressions, the same movement progressions that I would do with my mom or my dad or my friends who were just getting started. The same progressions. So the best progression is the one that can challenge the most advanced, someone like Annie Thorisdottir, and also ramp up the most novice, get those who are beginners to get started. So in other words, what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify the transition position with the intention of developing a progression, because that's where we're challenged. And the progression that we're trying to develop is an inclusive one. It's one that includes the most advanced and the most novice, the most basic level. And this is where we get into the understanding that when we can see movement from a position standpoint, we can not only simplify it, but we can now make things relevant to everyone. In other words, we start to realize that the common denominator, el denominador común del rendimiento, of the performance, is our human body, is our movement. And here's the beauty of it, is that we, as humans, didn't create it. We are simply observing our movement, and as we observe it, we are deciding what goes and what doesn't. So this is really important. I'm going to give you guys an example of a progression as we get into this a little further. So remember, 3 master positions: start, transition, finish. The transition position, where we run into trouble, is where we can create progressions. But it's also where we can define a movement. Let me explain what this means. You can have a movement that has hips involved, knees involved, ankle involved, that looks like squatting, but if the shape is slightly different, meaning you're in a squat position versus a hinge position, meaning bent over or a deadlift, all of a sudden you have 2 different movement patterns. You have a squat you have a deadlift. Different mechanics, similar transition positions. This is something I can get into more depth later on. Now, what happens as we move from one position to another? Well, we see motion, we see movement. This is the expression of what we're doing. So when you see someone perform a movement or you're performing a movement, you are going from one position to the next and you're simply moving. Now, here is a problem, is that movement, when we just say movement in this sense, it's general. Meaning it's not something that is specific. What do I mean by this? Well, if I ask you right now to think about a squat, do you have a picture of what a squat looks like in your head? If I ask you to picture a push-up, do you have a picture of what that push-up is in your head? How about a handstand push-up? How about a run? How about a jump, a land, a throw, a catch? You have the images. What does this mean? This means that there's a code, but that code is general. What does that mean? Well, that means that if I say squat, the question is, what kind of squat are you thinking about? Because squatting mechanics, squatting is general, but the expression of a squat is specific. What does this mean? Maybe some of you guys were thinking about an air squat. Others of you were thinking about a back squat. Others were thinking about a back squat for Olympic weightlifting. Others were thinking about a back squat for powerlifting. Slightly different styles. Still squatting. So when we talk about movement, it's important that we realize that movement is general. It's this overarching example or expression of movement. And thus we need to add in the third part of this framework, which remember was position, movement, purpose. We need to add in purpose. Once we add in purpose to our movement, it becomes specific. What does this mean? Think about a purpose for squatting a barbell specifically for improving Olympic weightlifting. The barbell may go a little bit higher on your back. Your feet may be a little narrower. The depth of your squat may be a little bit greater. And thus, the mechanics or the expression. Why is this important? Well, because if you're in the functional fitness space or CrossFit space, you care about doing constantly varied functional movements performed at high intensity. And thus, you need to understand that there are different ways of squatting, jumping, landing, running, walking even. You can go sideways, backwards, forwards. You can run forwards, backwards. You can carry load. That would change the way that you run. And when you understand that there's a general movement with a specific expression, all of a sudden you can develop progressions. You can understand where a movement comes from and where it's going and how we can use it. This, as obvious as it may seem, is one of the most important aspects to be aware of, because it's what's going to allow you to unlock the method that you need to follow at this very moment to get where you want to go. Moreover, where you need to go. It's very important that we understand that every single one of us, regardless of our position, we care about perfection. Okay, we care about performance. We want to do it well. We want to take our game to the next level. And unfortunately, when we try to find the ideal or the perfection, what ends up happening is we get lost, because perfection does not exist. In other words, what I'm trying to express here is that there are 7.8 billion people walking this planet, and every single one of us is slightly different. Thus, a technique or a movement expression is going to be slightly different. Why is this important? Well, this is important because if we are trying to develop a movement practice based on how to perform a movement, a specific movement, a technique, then we will always get lost and we will always be below our ability to reach our potential. Thus, we have functional movements. Movements that serve a purpose. If I can accomplish the task, then the movement is perfect. The question is, how are we measuring it? Is it effective? Is it efficient? Does it apply to us? Is it moving me where I want to go? Is it progressing me? And this is where it's very important to now define what functional fitness is, which CrossFit, for example, has done really well. And if you look up on Google the definition of functional fitness, you'll get something that is pretty good too, but it doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because it doesn't capture it all. And that's why it's important when we think about functional fitness to not try to define of what it is. What do I mean by this? Well, the essence of functional fitness has three main components. Component number one, it's safe. What does this mean? This means that if I go into a movement and do it and come out of it, I will come out unharmed. No injuries, no problems. An example of this was when I was a kid. If I would tear my hands up doing the high bar or parallel bars or the rings, I would usually get scolded or in trouble because that meant that I wasn't paying attention to how I was moving and I was being unsafe in my performance. And on top of that, I wouldn't be able to practice tomorrow. I wouldn't be able to train tomorrow. I would have overdone it today and then actually set myself back in my progress, in my progression. So number one characteristic of the essence of functional movements is safety. Here in the U.S. where I live, people sign waivers because they're scared of getting sued. They are obsessed with safety, but in a way that is scary. We should not be scared of safety. We should take cautious risks. This is very important. Take a cautious risk. Be calculated. Think about it. Explore it. If you mess up, no big deal. Okay, that's a setback. I learned. I can now move forward. So the essence of functional fitness starts with safety. The second characteristic of functional fitness is that it is useful. It serves a purpose. Position, movement, purpose. Remember that at the top? That's the most important. And that purpose is really interwoven with utility. It serves a purpose. If I do it and I come out on the other side unharmed, great. If it serves a purpose, meaning it's getting me closer to where I want to go, then also great. That is a functional progression, a functional movement. And then finally, this is the most important one, for me at least. It's the long-lasting component, the longevity. Meaning that I can do it today, tomorrow, in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, for the rest of my life. Now, you may be thinking that there are certain movements that are impossible to maintain for long periods of time. Yes, there are some that are, such as, for example, in gymnastics, on the rings, doing an iron cross, where you're holding yourself up like this, whoop. That may be very hard to do for long periods of time. That being said, you can create scaled versions that are less demanding on the body, but still give you the same utility, the same stimulus, and fit within your practice, and can also be maintained for a long period of time. So this is very important. Functional movements have three characteristics: safe, useful, long-lasting. Now, the safety, the utility, and the longevity create something that is very important, which is our movement standard. This is what we say is, and also is your obsession, but we say is your prescription. 21, 15, 9 thrusters, pull-ups at 95 pounds for the guys, 65 for the ladies. Okay, great. That's a prescription. The truth about that is that that's a universal prescription. But what we need to identify as individuals is what is our individual prescription, that it's right for you. This is why we need to be able to speak the language of movement and translate our performance into something that is applicable to me. But if I haven't taken the time to even think about some of the stuff that I'm sharing with you right now, we're going to miss the boat. So this, once you have it, directly relates to your purpose, your movement standard, the essence of the movement, meaning that it's safe, useful, long-lasting, defines your purpose and thus defines your movement and thus defines the different positions that you're going to go through. And why is this important? Well, because I believe that you care about your performance. And if you care about your performance, you should care about trying to identify with some of the stuff that I'm sharing with you right now. I want to make a quick aside. And the aside is that some of what I'm sharing with you right now may not make sense logically at this moment. You may be hearing it and thinking, you're nuts. What are you talking about? But there may be parts of what I'm saying that is resonating with you. Whatever is resonating with you, where you're like, oh yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, that's where you need to go and explore. And as I continue to unfold into this framework of freestyle connection, which I'll explain what it is in a second, I want you to also be aware that a lot of what I'm sharing may be insightful, maybe also a little inspiring, but it's going to be mostly confusing. Confusing meaning you're going to feel a little clouded and a little unsure of what I'm talking about. Realize that that is an opportunity for introspection. Our confusion is the bridge into introspection. Introspection is where we identify what it is that we truly need and what we can truly achieve. And thus, this framework starts to make sense. And that's what we're trying to reveal right now. And this is very important when it comes to understanding the language of human movement, which is a communication method. But who are we communicating with? We're first communicating with ourselves and later with others. The communication with ourselves is identifying what is it that I need. Oh yeah, I want to be the fittest in the world. Now I'm going to go practice. I'm going to express my fitness. I'm going to experiment competing with someone. That will be what I integrate. Once I integrate that which works for me, that's the moment my performance goes up. I just progressed. So the language of movement is one of the most important languages we can speak, because it's not only a performance language from a physical perspective, but also from an intellectual, communicate without words. My presence alone can do it for you. I can look into your eyes. I can smile. I can sit here with confidence and assure you that I'm communicating something that is important to you and that you can translate into helping yourself get your needs met. That's the power of the language of movement. Now, we're going to take functional movements, which I believe most of us watching this right now are familiar with. And if you're not familiar with it, I would highly encourage you to go do some research on it. But it's an approach to movement that is based on completing tasks. That's all it is. And in our functional movement, I want to divide things now into two characteristics. I want to divide it into what we would call is our capacity to move. It's not our contractile potential. It's not how much weight we can put on a barbell. It's not how many muscle ups we can do. It's our capacity to move. Now, what the heck is capacity to move? Well, it's as simple as asking yourself if you are able to perform a certain movement, to get into certain positions. Let me give you an example about this. I'm going to ask you a question to give you the example. How strong do you think you need to be to perform a pistol squat? A pistol squat being a single leg squat. That's my pistol, okay? How strong do you need to be to perform a pistol? Give me a number. Anybody? No. You don't have a number because the strength is not measured in numbers. It's measured in our ability to move. And the answer to how strong do you need to be is strong enough. Or like someone says here, like Matt Fraser. Okay, that's how strong you have to be to perform a pistol. One thing that we know is that there are very strong individuals out there that can squat very heavy load and cannot perform a pistol. And then there are people out there who cannot squat a lot of weight but can perform a pistol. So notice how strength is not measured in numbers. It's measured in our ability to move. When we are able to move, the numbers will follow. This is very important. Now, in our strength, it's important that when we look at movement, we think about it from a joint perspective. From our shoulders, our elbows, our wrists, our hips, our knees, our ankles, our little finger joints, every single joint. Body at a local level. What is local? Local is in one place. Just here. What is happening at the shoulder? What is happening at the elbow? What is happening at the wrist? When I do a push-up, what is happening in these different joints? When we can look at movement from this perspective, we can start to develop strength. Strength, once again, being the capacity to move, the capacity to get into positions, the capacity to do a movement without having to measure it. Very important stuff. And to realize that within our movement at a local level, we can create a progression. And this progression goes through 3 stages. A simple one, a complex one, and then back to a simple one. Do you guys remember from the beginning, position that had start, transition, and finish? Our progressions are the same. They simply progress through a simple stage, a complex stage, and then a simple stage again. There are many examples of this, but just think about how basic a movement pattern is at a joint level in the beginning or early stages of learning it. And then how complicated it gets as you start to perform the big picture. And then once you've been able to perform the big picture, you start to progress further and further, and you start to simplify things. And then things become really clean, really efficient, really effective. You can also think about it like this. Imagine building up to a movement like a snatch or a clean or a jerk, okay? And weightlifting. And think about the first motions that you practice. Maybe it's just dip and drive, dip and drive. That's such a simple movement, which later on turns into a clean, a snatch, a jerk. And then when you want to reinforce the pattern, you maybe do some assistance work, maybe some simple strength and conditioning that looks like squatting, pressing, curls, pull-ups. You see how it became simple again? Same movement pattern, effective at a local level. Now, when we take what is locally and we add it all up, we add all the pieces of our body up, we go into a global perspective. This is what our body looks like from head to toes. This is what you see when you're watching someone from a distance move. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at the whole body. And what we look for as human beings is for beauty. We look for something that is efficient, effective. Think about someone you know who can perform movement in a way where you look at them and you think, wow, they're so fluid. They move with grace. They are such great performers. Those people who are expressing themselves at that level, you're looking at them from a global perspective, those people are skillful people. And that's why it's important that we see from a local perspective practice being virtuous. That is practice being skillful. This is something that is talked about a lot in the CrossFit community. So when you think about skill, remember that we're thinking about skill from a global perspective. We're thinking about the basic shapes that the body goes through, which are extension, flexion, lateral flexion and extension, and rotation, and then combinations of all of those. So flexion, extension, lateral flexion, extension, rotation, and then combinations. In our programming, in our training, in our practice, we no longer prescribe skill days. Skill days is not a thing. Skill days, the way that is currently presented in the CrossFit space or in the fitness space, is in reality better said as a technique day. Because what one is practicing on a skill day is learning how to do a specific movement. A specific movement is a technique. The skill is the general movement pattern. Remember when I was talking about position, movement, purpose earlier, and I talked about movement being general, and then purpose being the thing that made it specific? Purpose, what this means. Take a snatch, for example. You can snatch a barbell, you can snatch a dumbbell, a kettlebell, a sandbag, a baby, a bottle of water. You can snatch anything. The movement pattern, the specificity, the technique varies according to what you're snatching. Do you see how we have a great variety of snatches right there? That's the base of our pyramid. But at the very top of that pyramid, which is a unique expression of our snatching ability, is a technique. And that technique is what we can build up from the bottom. This is what we're really doing in CrossFit when we do constantly varied functional movements performed at high intensity. We are practicing a variety of skills, a variety of techniques that can translate into a higher level of performance. I want you to think about the CrossFit Games. One of the things that is unique about the CrossFit Games, if you follow the games at all, is that there are events that people are able to adapt the quickest to those new techniques that do the best. And what we have learned is that those who have the most fundamental level of skills performed in a way that they understand it are the ones who can take those tools and translate them. Think about this. If you are a CrossFit coach or you've been in a CrossFit space for a while, you maybe seen some people walk in and on the first day of coming in, being able to perform a muscle up on the rings and wondering who the heck is this person and how did they do that? Once you start probing a little bit and you start asking them the questions, the truth comes out. They say, when I was a kid, I did a little bit of gymnastics. And then I went from gymnastics and I got into track and field. And I became a decathlete. And then when I became a decathlete, I started lifting. So I learned Olympic weightlifting. I enjoyed powerlifting as well. And then on the weekends, I just like to dance. So I'm an avid dancer. And I play music, by the way. And I can read music. And I understand athletic performance. This person who has such an extensive background in movement, once you skill, we think about looking at the whole body, the global aspect of things, and that we realize that skill is the base of performance. In other words, it's our ability, and I think you need to write this one down, it's our ability to apply strength. This is very important. Ability to apply strength. What's the difference here between strength and skill? Strength is our capacity to get into these positions. It's our capacity to move. Can I do a pistol? The skill is the ability to apply strength. In other words, it's the ability to apply my capacity to do a pistol to doing something else, which could be do 10 pistols, do jumping pistols, do weighted pistols, do an overhead pistol. Do you guys see how that starts to unfold? It's a variety. It allows you to open up your abilities. The same planet, okay? We have a center of mass. We live on top of this earth. We have a base of support. And when we move, the first thing we do is we shift our center of mass. Imagine your center of mass being right here and your base of support being right here. The first thing you do is you shift your center of mass. When you walk, that's the first thing you do. You lean forward. When you run, you lean forward. When you do a handstand push-up, you lean out of that, and then you press up, and then you finish. When you're doing a muscle-up, you're shifting your center of mass so you can get over the rings. It always starts with a shift. The second thing that happens to all of us is that there's a change in connection. Think about walking. Imagine this being my foot on the ground. When I take a step, my connection changes. Do you guys see? I lift my foot. Skillful, I can do the shift, the connection, which is the change of points of contact, over and over again in a fluid fashion. My ability to be fluid in my capacity to shift, connect, and flow is what develops my skill. My skill, once applied to learning something new, is what we call skill transfer. And skill transfer is the essence of progression. And remember, when we were talking about this earlier, about the language of movement earlier, we were talking about developing strong progressions. Now, if you can follow me here, I want you to see this. If we take what's local, our joints, as we're moving, we take what's global, the big shape of our body, and we add those two up, and we see the two aspects, local plus global, it produces an outcome. The outcome that it produces is the style of movement that I'm executing. What the heck do I mean? Imagine the following. Imagine your shoulder, your elbow, your wrist. We're pulling. I'm just doing a pull-up, okay? If at my joint level, I am performing this movement, and at my global level, I'm completely straight, I am performing a strict pull-up. Does everyone understand that? I want you to think about that. Now, if we take the same movement, shoulder, elbow, wrist, just pull. But now, at a global level, from head to toes, I'm going to extension and flexion. I am kipping. I'm performing a kipping pull-up. Let's say I added to that kipping pull-up at level 1 kipping pull-up. What if I took this cycle as I pulled up, instead of pushing back, I just pulled through, and I turned it into a butterfly pull-up. Same pulling mechanics at the joint level, but globally looks different. I am progressing. Strict pull-up, kipping pull-up, CrossFit level 1, kipping pull-up, butterfly pull-up, chest to bar pull-up, muscle up. Do you guys see how we're creating a progression? Every single one of those expressions, those are techniques. Now here's the problem. We get caught in those techniques, and what we want to try to do is we want to try to see the intersection amongst all those techniques. The intersection amongst all those techniques, that is the skill. That is the base. That is what we're really trying to practice. But if we cannot see that, we miss the point. Here's an example. I get a ton of people who come out working. I say, hey, show me your pull-ups. And they show me 10 butterfly pull-ups. They're killing it. They can do butterfly pull-ups all day. And I say, hey, show me 10 regular kipping pull-ups with no butterfly. And then all of a sudden they feel lost. I say, show me 10 strict pull-ups. And then all of a sudden they have to change their hand position. They change the width of their hands. And what you start to notice is that they have chosen a style of movement, a technique that they thought was relevant to compete within their context, within their gym. And now they've lost the ability to transfer those skills because they don't have a foundation that is transferable. In other words, their strict pull-ups don't match their kipping pull-ups. Their kipping pull-ups don't match their CrossFit level 1 pull-up. Their CrossFit level 1 pull-up don't match their butterfly pull-up. Their butterfly pull-up doesn't match their chest to bar pull-up. Their chest to bar pull-up thus doesn't match a transition possibility. You ask them to do what is a dip or a push-up, the dip, and this is the biggest problem that we see in the fitness industry. People teaching technique and not skill. And it's not that they're teaching technique because they don't know how to teach skill. It's simply because the culture has never helped them understand where skill comes from and how to develop it. And if you think about this, Every technique is a movement standard. But the most important part is that every one of those movement standards connects to the next thing. And what is the next thing? Well, the next thing is dependent on your purpose. Do you want to go to the CrossFit Games? Then you have to be good at everything and you have to learn on the spot. Do you want to lose some weight or get leaner? Then it's not about the techniques that you're performing. It's about what you're doing in the kitchen and then how you're seeing your eating as fuel applied to your training and creating a lifestyle. Purpose is the anchor for developing any progression. And this right here, the ability to connect all styles, that is freestyle connection. And that's why the language of movement is so important. And if you see the tie-in, now all of a sudden you're starting to speak it, you're starting to challenge it, you're starting to make sense of it. And that is what we're really trying to develop with this movement. And that, my friends, is this framework. And the reason I wanted to share this framework with you guys today was because if you are in the fitness space, either as a coach, as an owner, or someone who just cares about progressing, you're going to have to start somewhere. And it's going to start here. It's going to start in here. So it's in your head and in your heart. Why is this important? Well, in your head, you got the intention. That's the intellect. In your heart, you got the passion. That's the fuel. This needs to align. And this is where someone's asking, should we do a better goal setting then? Yes. The better goal setting comes from having a better understanding of what the process looks like. So this is extremely important. All right. As we're finishing up here, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to look and see what we got. I have a question here. Which is the most important skill that we need to improve our movements? Well, that's the problem, is that the question is indicating that you're trying to find a quick fix, that you're trying to take a pill that's going to solve your problems. That's not it. Start with the movement that inspires you the most. Start with the movement that when you do it, you feel excited. Start with the movement that when you film it and you watch it, you love it. Start with the movement that you can't stop thinking about. And then take that movement as far as you can. And then once you get hit with the wall where you're presented with your weaknesses, use your strength, use your interest in filling all those gaps. There is not one skill that one can choose that is going to be universal. It has to come from you. I think that the technique is very important to your correct process. Yeah, technique is extremely important, but think about safe, useful, and long-lasting. On top of that, it's important that we understand that a technique is the product of not just our biomechanical expression, but also of playing the rules of a game or a sport. And the ones who can do it in the most beautiful fashion are the ones who tend to win. So this is extremely important. And this is what we would call, what Jordy says here, virtuosity. Let's see what else we have here, if we have any questions. Animals movement, that is so useful and necessary to understand natural correct positions. Yeah, watching animals is extremely important because we start to realize that, for example, if you watch a cheetah sprinting, the spine is not stiff. The spine is super fluid. So it's important that we understand looking for stability and control. This is what we call motor control. And animals do this brilliantly. So yes, very, very important. Someone says, I feel so weak in the transitions. Yeah, transitions are usually where we find our weaknesses. Could you give us an example of a progression? Yeah, I think I did with the pull-up understanding. You can do a ring row into a pull-up, into a chest to bar pull-up, into a kipping pull-up, into a CrossFit level 1 kipping pull-up, into a butterfly pull-up, chest to bar pull-up, butterfly chest to bar pull-up, and then eventually progressing into muscle up and so on. It's seeing the movements in that way. Another question is, how can I learn it exploring on your own? That being said, there have been so many repetitions done and there's so much experience that if you can find a coach that you trust, you can have rapport with, and you feel comfortable with, you're going to be able to develop something very special. And I would highly recommend that every single one of us has a coach. I'll give you an example. I can do handstands. I can hold a handstand for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and no problem. And I can do different varieties of handstand, but I have a handstand or a hand balancing coach, someone who watches me, tells me, hey Carl, the hips a little bit more over here, relax your hands a little bit, maybe put your thumb in this position, move your neck like this, point your toes in this direction, focus more on these drills. I'm going to challenge you with this other thing. Yeah, get a coach. Very important. Any other questions before we end this awesome live? Please feel free to ask. If not, know that this video will be available here on the platform at Fit as Freakus on IGTV, and then there seems to be an always follow me at Carl Paoli, which you can find me here. I'll just write it down. I don't think you'll be able to click through on this, but I'll just write it. That's my name. You can follow me there. Happy to take any questions there. You can always reach out to me in Spanish if you want, and I would be happy to answer. Other than that, thank you for being here. If any other questions roll through, and just remember the following, is that whatever you're doing, remember what you're doing it for. I, for example, when I was doing gymnastics, I thought I was doing it to be at the top of the podium at the Olympics. And what I wanted was the flashing lights, the stadium. And when I had not made it in my life and that I was a loser. But as time went on, I realized that what I really wanted was something else. And this came to me when I realized that what it would be like to win the Olympics and not have anybody in the stadium would feel slightly different. And moreover, it would feel very different if I stepped off the podium and walked to the back and I had no friends or family to celebrate. In other words, the victory itself wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for the moment of realization and then being able to share that with my friends, with my family, celebrate that. Why? Well, because I needed that step to be able to get to the next level. And now that I am older, I realize that it's not about the scale of the victory. It's not about making it to Olympics, but it's what the victory teaches us. And there are so many victories that we experience on a daily basis that we simply forget or misinterpret because we haven't practiced. So it's really important that we practice the celebration of those victories, which come from the realization that they happen, and then sharing that with the people that we love and care about the most. And that can be as simple as if you watch this right now and you were listening in, to take some of the information, translate it into something that makes sense to you. Because I am here speaking to you doesn't mean that I have the solutions. I am just a dude trying to figure it out. And if you're the same, then you know what to do. You just take this, translate it, share it. And that will get you closer and closer to that sense of fulfillment that you're looking for. All right, Alberto says the video will be online tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate you guys.